President Donald Trump says tariffs are like medicine for the U.S. economy. But with markets crashing, nations plunging in stocks despair, people are asking who is really paying the price? The U.S., China, or Europe, or even Africa? These and many more will be detailed in today's Flash News. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Tabitha Ako. Let's begin. Global financial markets are shaken to their core as Asian stocks plunged today, following U.S. President Donald Trump's firm defense of his new tariffs, calling them medicine for the U.S. economy. Trump showed no signs of backing down, but with markets in free fall and key trading partners retaliating, is the U.S. curing the patient or killing global growth in the process? The economic fallout was immediate. Hong Kong's Hang Seng index dropped by a staggering 13.2%, its worst day since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. China is not left out. Shanghai Composite sank 7.3%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 fell 7.8%. In early European trading, London's FTSE 100 was also hit, down by 4.85% by 9 a.m. And the U.S. stock futures are pointing to more trouble. S&P also 500 was down by 4.93%, the Dow Jones 4.32%, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq by 5.33%. That's a lot right there. But then President Trump, speaking to reporters about Air Force One, he shrugged off the panic. Here's what he has to say. Let's take a look.
They look at the fact that we have $1 billion trade deficit. When you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country. But with China, it's $1 trillion. And we have to solve our trade deficit with China. We have $1 trillion trade deficit with China. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year we lose with China. And unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal. Now, I'm willing to deal with China, but they have to solve their surplus. We have a tremendous deficit problem with China. They have a surplus of at least $1 trillion a year. I think it's like $1.1 trillion. And I want that solved. Because of the tariffs, we have $7 trillion already committed to be invested in the United States, building auto plants, building chip companies, and all sorts of companies are coming into our country at levels that we've never seen before. Biden had nothing coming in. This was a dead country with Biden. He didn't know what he was doing, and that's now been proven at least. Next year will make us $1 trillion. In addition to the $1 trillion, thousands of companies are going to relocate back into the United States. In North Carolina, already furniture people are starting to move back in.
Right there, Trump has just emphasized that countries wanting to avoid the new tariffs would have to pay a lot of money or make a fair deal. On his Truth Social platform, he remains defiant. We will win, hang tough. It won't be easy. In his view, these trade measures will drive foreign companies to move manufacturing to the U.S., boosting domestic jobs and fixing long-standing trade imbalances, where there will be no deficit. Well, it is a global recession, but then this could be a real threat. Investors are rattled not just by the tariffs themselves, but by the broader message. Washington is willing to go all in on trade brinkmanship, China, once cautious in its response, has now fully entered the fray. On Friday, it announced a 34% retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods, mirroring Trump's new rate. Combined with earlier duties, some goods now face total tariffs exceeding 50%, making U.S. and China trade nearly unworkable. And the timing was crucial, with Chinese and Hong Kong markets closed for a holiday, which was Friday afternoon. The full shock hits today, sending a clear signal that a global trade war is no longer hypothetical. It's right here before our face. This escalated tit-for-tat also undermines hope for near-term negotiations. China's tough stance suggests it is more interested in maintaining dignity than avoiding economic pain. As for the U.S., Trump is doubling down, insisting no deal is possible without first eliminating the trade deficit. Smaller economies also, like in Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam, are now scrambling to renegotiate trade terms with the U.S. But many fear they may be caught in the crossfire. Custom agents in the U.S. already started collecting Trump's base 10% tariffs over the weekend, with reciprocal rates ranging from 11% to 50% expected by Wednesday. Still on, some financial analysts like Richard Flax of Money Firm had hoped the White House was bluffing. But the message suggests President Trump is comfortable with the fallout and plans to stay this course. Major banks are not left out. They are now bracing for the worst. Also, British car makers are already feeling the heat, facing a new 25% US tariff on electric vehicles. Meanwhile, over there in UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the global trade system is being transformed and vowed to ease EV production rules to support local industry. But think tanks are less optimistic. Coming down to KPMG, warned that UK GDP growth could drop to just 0.8% in 2025 and 2026 due to tariffs on cars, steel and aluminium, despite pharmaceutical exports being exempted. Well, bringing you over to Africa, on African scene, severe flooding and destruction in Democratic Republic of Congo's capital leaves dozens dead. In a catastrophic event, thousands more have been affected after torrential rains in Kinshasa. Health officials warn the death toll is still provisional as rescue operations continue. Most fatalities have been attributed to collapsing walls and poor infrastructure, once again exposing the fragile state of urban planning in one of Africa's largest cities. But beyond immediate tragedy, the floods raise a deeper concern in a city of nearly 17 million. How much longer can unregulated growth and underinvestment in infrastructure be sustained without catastrophic consequences? Meanwhile, the Njili River, which runs through the capital, burst its banks late Friday night following intense rainfall. This caused major disruptions, including the submersion of a key national highway. Stranded motorists like Patricia Mikonga, who was returning from the airport, described a night spent trapped in vehicles with no safe place to park. Electricity outages and water shortages hit several neighborhoods, leaving thousands in the dark and cut off from basic services. Now, speaking on national television, Kinshasa Governor Daniel Bumba Lubaki said efforts were underway to restore water services and blamed illegal housing in flood-prone zones for contributing to the disaster. These makeshift settlements are not only dangerous, they put thousands of lives at risk, he warned, suggesting evictions may be necessary to prevent future tragedies. However, critics argue that government failure to provide safe and affordable housing options has pushed citizens into these vulnerable areas in the first place. From a left-leaning perspective, the Kinshasa floods highlight a glaring lack of long-term investment in public infrastructure and social protection. Advocates for climate justice stress that marginalized populations are disproportionately affected by extreme weather events worsened by climate change. However, let's point to Poor governance, weak enforcement of land use policies, and unchecked population growth are central to the crisis. The current trajectory is unsustainable. Moving on, hydrologist Raphael explained that human activities have degraded the Njili River over time, reducing its natural ability to manage floodwaters. These anthropogenic actions, he explained, where the river's capacity has been diminished through unregulated development and pollution. Meanwhile, the flooding adds yet another layer of crisis to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is already grappling with violent conflict in its eastern region. The Rwanda-backed M23 rebel group has intensified attacks in recent months, with over 7,000 people reportedly killed and millions displaced. Amid war and weather disasters, the state's capacity to protect its citizens is under serious strain. Now, as international aid groups prepare to respond, the situation in Kinshasa poses a second, broader question for African urban centers across the continent. Are rapidly growing cities truly preparing for the dual threats of climate change and population explosion, or are they building toward their own collapse? Think about that. Well, moving forward, in a recent development, the United States has revoked all visas held by South Sudanese passport holders, citing that the African nation's refusal to accept its deported citizens and accusing its leadership of exploiting America's immigration system. Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a strongly worded statement on Saturday, said the South Sudanese transitional government had failed to fully respect international repatriation protocols. But then, beyond visa cancellation, the move signals a deeper diplomatic message. Is this a necessary step for immigration enforcement or a dangerous precedent for penalizing unstable nations during moments of internal crisis? Rubio emphasized that all countries must accept the return of their citizens in a timely manner when deported by other nations, including the United States. He said Washington will not only revoke existing visas, but also suspend the issuance of new ones to all South Sudanese passport holders. South Sudan is taking advantage of the United States, he stated. But then, this decision marks the first blanket visa revocation by the U.S. targeting an entirely nationality since President Donald Trump returned to the White House on January 28th. Well, Trump's renewed presidency has brought a more tone, maybe aggressive, we could say, to immigration policy, in sharp contrast to his predecessor Joe Biden's approach, which had granted temporary protected status to South Sudanese nationals. Now, this temporary protected status shields foreign nationals from deportation if their home countries are experiencing conflict or extreme hardship. That designation, however, is set to expire on May 3rd. But then that's President Trump's policy right there, and we all know who he is. And moving on, Rubio hinted that the U.S. may consider revisiting the visa ban, but only if South Sudan demonstrates full cooperation with deportation proceedings. Analysts note that while the visa cancellation is symbolic, it could affect thousands of South Sudanese residents, students, and asylum seekers living legally in the U.S., many of whom fled due to violence back at home. But then, still on, South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, is again facing a political chaos. Fighting has escalated between government forces and opposition groups, renewing fears of another civil war. Just years after a peace deal ended the last conflict that killed over 400,000 people between 2013 and 2018. These tensions rose sharply after Vice President Riek Machar was arrested last month, a move seen by many as the collapse of the fragile 2018 power-sharing agreement. His detention has sparked confrontation outside the capital, Juba, between forces loyal to him and those aligned with President Salva Kiir. Meanwhile, The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned recently that South Sudan is teetering on the edge of the abyss, facing not only a security breakdown but also a political uphill amid growing displacement and instability. Now, critics of the U.S. visa ban argue that punishing ordinary South Sudanese nationals amid a national crisis is inhuman and counterproductive. They believe the Biden's-era TPS approach is better balanced of compassion with national interest. However, let's view the visa revocation as a firm stand for sovereignty and border security, especially against nations unwilling to cooperate on deportations. But beneath the political back and forth lies a critical question. Can America's foreign policy effectively hold foreign governments accountable without deepening humanitarian crisis for their citizens? A critical question at that. But then, bringing you now to the conclusion of this report. As the conflict worsened and humanitarian outlook darkened, many now ask, will the world allow South Sudan to descend into chaos again? Or will global powers act to prevent another disaster in Africa's youngest nation? A very critical one at that. But then, until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, we're bringing you recent happenings from the home front on Undaunted at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day and stay safe.